what caused World War I? World War I took place from 1914 until 1918, and by the time it ended in 1918, it had become the largest, most costly, most destructive war in human history until that time. The war left over 10 million people dead and 20 million people wounded. The war included countries from all over the globe participating either directly or indirectly in the conflict. No single event would have been enough to drag each of these countries into this conflict. It would have taken much more than that. And reflecting over time, historians have generally attributed 4 underlying causes to this war. These 4 causes put together created circumstances very similar to The Perfect Storm. If you've ever seen this movie, it's based on a true story about a terrible storm that took place near Alaska, sinking a fishing vessel and killing everyone on board. Now that storm was so rare and so terrible basically because of a twist of fate, because a cold front was coming in from the north while Hurricane Grace was sort of weakening but joining it from the south, and a cyclone was coming in from the east. All of these things just so happened to converge at the exact same time in the exact same place, and unfortunately that fishing ship was located right there, and it sank. I often think about World War I in a similar situation to this, because without these 4 causes intersecting at the same time in the same place, World War I might never have occurred. But because these 4 causes were going on simultaneously, it created that perfect storm for this war to break out. The first cause of World War I is militarism. The definition of militarism is the building up of a country's armed forces to prepare for war. It is sometimes referred to as an arms race because countries seem to be competing with one another to have the largest military with the most weapons. Arms in this context, by the way, means weapons. Prior to World War I, Great Britain and Germany in particular greatly increased the size of their militaries. And as a consequence, the military had a larger influence on public policy and helped push their countries into war. Now, if you think about it, that really makes a lot of sense. Because if you've spent all of this money building up your military, one, you're going to feel the need to justify the money you've spent. I've paid for all these supplies and all these soldiers. I should be able to use them. Otherwise, what did I spend all this money for? Take a look at this little political cartoon that illustrates militarism at the time period. You see, each of these characters represent a different country. You have France over here, Russia, Turkey, Germany, and England. And you can see they're packing, they have lots of weapons, different sorts of weapons, and they're all facing each other, threatening one another, pointing their weapons at each other in a very menacing way. You also may notice that Uncle Sam is sitting over here at the top of the illustration, looking on, but really not quite involved yet. He has a weapon too. He appears to be prepared, but he is not engaging in this conflict just yet. If you look at this chart, it shows the increase in military spending over time. In Britain, for example, in 1908, they were spending $308 million. This is in contemporary U.S. money to give you some context. As of 1913, the year before the war begins, they're now spending $368 million. If you look over at Germany, the same time period, in 1908, they're spending $396 million. But in 1913, they're spending $573 million. So again, that's a lot of money to be spending on soldiers and weapons that you're not using. People might feel that is wasteful. Now, I want to draw a silly analogy to help you understand this. I want you to imagine that there is a bullying problem in your school. Kids are being picked on, their money's being taken, that sort of thing. There's fights in the hallway. And your principal's bothered by this. He doesn't want students coming into school feeling threatened, feeling insecure. So he decides that his solution to this problem is going to be to tell every student to bring a weapon with them to school. Now, they're not to use the weapon, but they're allowed to have it with them for defense. So the idea is a bully's not going to pick on another student if he knows that other student has a knife or a bat or something that he can defend himself with. It's supposed to be a deterrent. So in theory, that sounds like a great idea. But in reality, I want you to imagine what the hallway in the cafeteria of your school is going to look like if every student there, from the meanest to the nicest, has some kind of weapon with them. It would be chaos. It would actually become more violent, not less. And the reason is, when people have weapons, they are going to be more inclined to use them. Without weapons, we have to work our problems out peacefully. We have to talk it out and negotiate and, go ask for help and that sort of thing. But if I know I have a weapon in my back pocket, I might just decide, oh, I'm just going to beat this kid up then. Because I can, because it's available to me. And this is the same thing that European countries are going to face at that time. We have all these weapons. Rather than negotiate and resolve our problems peacefully, I'll just use my military to solve my problems. The second cause of World War I is a system of alliances. Now, an alliance is a close association of nations formed to advance common interests or causes. You don't necessarily have to be friends with your ally, but you have to have agreed that you share similar interests and you will work with one another to help protect those interests. Ironically, prior to the outbreak of World War I, many European countries joined alliances in an attempt to prevent war. They believed that these alliances would create a balance of power, so no one nation would be able to attack and conquer another. Again, like militarism, it was supposed to be a deterrent. If I knew, for example, that Russia was allies with France, then I might decide I better not, as Germany, invade France because Russia then might invade me. So it was supposed to discourage countries from fighting. So unfortunately, this plan backfired. Because military alliances require member nations to fight in the defense of their allies, wars could not simply be fought between two countries anymore. If one country declared war on another, all of the attacked country's allies would be forced to fight as well. So you can see how this is going to be a domino effect. Instead of it being just between two countries, it would be a small war, probably end in a short period of time. It's going to be dragging in these other countries that otherwise would not have been involved. Here's a little political cartoon from the time period, and it actually sort of shows you the timeline of World War I. World War I really begins in Serbia. And if you see Austria-Hungary here is threatening Serbia. Well, Serbia's buddy over here, Russia, he is then threatening Austria for threatening Serbia, and it kind of goes down the line. If you strike my friend, I'll do this. If you hit him, I'll do this. Hey, if you don't, I'm going to do this. And it drags in more countries that otherwise would have been involved. So alliances really should not be that foreign to us. We think about them. We see them on TV all the time. One of my students' favorite shows is Pretty Little Liars, which focuses on these four girls that are very good friends. And one of the main premises of the show is that they are being threatened by this unknown enemy. So at different points in the show, they form alliances with another character named Mona, who they ordinarily don't like and they don't necessarily trust and they don't necessarily get along with. But in a few different points in the show, she is feeling threatened by this other character as well. So they realize that they are in the same situation at the same time. Their interests are sort of aligned and that it would be in their best interest to work together, at least temporarily. So they form an alliance. The third cause of World War I is imperialism. Imperialism is the extending of a nation's power and influence through diplomatic, economic, or military force. Prior to World War I, many European powers competed to create the largest empires. In particular, Europeans wanted to control parts of Africa and Asia because of the raw materials that those places could provide to the imperialist country. This greed and competition contributed to hostile relationships between different European countries. Confrontations over disputed imperial claims helped push the world into World War I. So if you look at this map, you can see that all of these places, especially in Asia and in Africa, are color-coded to associate with different European countries. The dark shaded areas are Britain. Then we have France, we have German, we have Dutch, Portuguese holdings. And really what this is causing here is jealousy. There's only so much land around the world to go around. Someone has called dibs on all of it at this point. So they're fighting over those claims. Who has the most? I called dibs on this first, then you came and took it. That's not fair. So there's jealousy and there's competition that's going to create this hostile environment, especially in Europe. Jealousy can definitely drive you to do some crazy things sometimes. So here's another silly analogy for you that might help. If you've ever watched a movie about a high school and the school cafeteria, you might notice cliques. All right, the cool girls, they've called dibs on all these tables, or the jocks have called dibs on all these other tables, and the other students aren't welcome there. Here you have the main character from Mean Girls trying to take a seat, and the cool girls are like, no, sorry, these seats are not available to you. Well, you can imagine that the people that are excluded from the tables, from having a place to sit, from having access to the resources that are there, are going to feel a little bit bitter, right? They might fight back against the people that are kind of calling dibs on all of this space. They might create an alliance with other people that are being left out and kind of work together to push out the more powerful groups of students. The last cause of World War I is nationalism. Now, nationalism is a devotion to one's country or one's culture and its interests, regardless of the impact that those interests have on other nations. So nationalism is sort of an extreme version of patriotism, where you're so devoted to, so loyal to, so much in love of your own country. You think your country's the best, that you are willing to take from other countries and hurt other countries in the search for resources and other things that are going to benefit your own country. Now you might think, oh, no one feels that way. No one would go to such extremes for their country. We all love our country, but we wouldn't go nuts like that. Well, think about any sporting event that you've ever been to. Just take a look at these videos here. These are sporting events. These things don't really matter. They're for entertainment. And if you can just look at the expressions on these people's faces, their loyalty to their team is to such a degree that they're really making fools of themselves. They're really being ridiculous here. And if you look at this corner of the screen, you'll see a little video clip of actually a fight breaking out in the stands. Here you have someone who's maybe rooting for the visiting team, and everyone else that's here to watch the sporting event for their team is getting angry. He's dumping his drink on him. So this loyalty really can drive us to do crazy things. Most likely these people that are behaving this way in the stands because they're really caught up in the game would never dream of behaving like this in the real world. Once they leave and they get back to work the next day, they're probably regular, average, reasonable people. But when you get caught up in the moment and your devotion to the team that you're rooting for, sometimes we'll be willing to do some extreme things. Now let's go back to the definition of nationalism for a quick second. I mentioned that it was an extreme devotion to one's country or one's culture, and that's particularly important to focus on here in World War I, because that's one of the main triggering events that actually starts this war. So nationalism can inspire people who share a common language or culture to want to unite politically. In 1871, for example, multiple German-speaking states joined together to form the nation of Germany. And World War I began largely because the Slavic people living in multiple European countries wanted to join together into one nation. Now, if you look here, I've just given this fictitious scenario where you have country A, B, C, and D, but in the corner of each of these countries, you have Smurfs living there. So it wouldn't be surprising if these Smurfs wanted to kind of unite and form their own country for the Smurfs. And obviously the countries A, B, C, and D, they're not going to be too happy about this. They're not going to just let them go without a fight. So these are the 4 causes of World War I altogether.